Hello. Welcome to the lecture. Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure. First time in Korea, first time in Seoul. So very exciting to be here. So I'm going to talk about chairs. A little bit about my background. I was born in Italy, but since 20 years I live in London, work in London, have a studio there. And I was fortunate enough at a very young age that I could learn the skill of a furniture maker. So I'm trained in furniture making, and from there I went through sculpture and design into becoming a designer. And you probably question yourself, why are we going to talk about chairs? We haven't heard so much already from Peter about chairs and the history of chairs. But chairs is something that I'm obviously very fond of, and something I'm designing a lot. But I think chairs also tell a lot about us. They tell a lot about how we live, tell a lot about how we make things, and they tell a lot about how we, also about our history. I think one could say that, tell me what chair you sit on, and I can tell you who you are. Would be a fair enough question to ask. And I think over the design history, I think we do measure design somehow through chairs. It was interesting that Peter chose to show chairs as an example of how design has evolved. So the chairs are not only there to have a functional use, but they also have a cultural use. And I think for me, this picture is a very curious picture. I found it while doing research about bentwood chairs, actually tonne chairs. And I'm not quite sure what the picture is about. Until this day, I haven't really found the exact source of the picture. Neither do I know the exact purpose of the picture. But the picture, for me, questions somehow the idea of how you can use a chair. Is it there just to be tested, the chair? Is it a performance? Are these people two artists? So for me, it questions a lot, and I think it makes me curious. And a lot of my work is about kind of asking questions, looking at the unconventional way of furniture, of design, and trying to understand how we can somehow transport these images into a creative work. Also, chairs are a relative new invention. I would say they're about 300 to 400 years old as a mass-consumed kind of product. Before that, people used kind of very simple benches, very simple stools. But somehow, a chair has become part of our cultural heritage. And not all chairs are comfortable. Also because we're not all the same shape. So in that sense, this photographic essay of Bruno Monari trying to find the perfect position on an uncomfortable chair explains a lot about the way that sometimes furniture or chairs itself don't necessarily always work. But I think they tell us a lot about what potential or different use furniture have and give us new ideas. I'm actually going to repeat myself what Peter said earlier on about tonne chairs, but I'm going to try to give it a different insight into the story of Michael Tonne. I think his interesting innovation was that he made a patent that was to bend any type of wood, even the most brittle, into desired form and curves by chemical and mechanical means. So basically, he found a way, and this is actually one of his first products. It's actually laminated plywood, where he actually didn't bend the solid wood. He actually made layers of different veneers, and then he tried to kind of bend it, and with the help of glue, he then managed to kind of create amazing shapes. Unfortunately, he went out of business with this idea, with this product, It was presented at a great exhibition in London, and he didn't really make any money. So therefore, he emigrated to Vienna, actually, because he was commissioned there to design floors initially, but also furniture for one of the crown princes. So this was one of his first kind of commissions for the Palais Liechtenstein. And it's also called the chair, the Sessel #1, the chair #1, where he basically then mastered to bend the plywood in a solid shape. And one of his kind of biggest discoveries was that mostly people would just bend the wood and leave it after it was bent. But he realized if you put pressure on either side of the wood, you compress the fibers, and therefore the wood would be more stable. So very simple kind of process, but it took him many years to perfect this particular skill. And I think what's interesting in a way that we've seen earlier on in Peter's presentation, that he managed to create a noble, elegant, and lightweight, and a durable piece of furniture. Prior to that, furniture looked quite heavy. They were made out of solid beads of wood. They looked very boxy. They looked, in a way, chunky. And I think there's one of the reasons why also furniture were carved and very ornamented, because they looked very clumsy. So if you had a clumsy piece of furniture, you had to ornament them to make them kind of more interesting. So in a way, with this invention, he could liberate himself from the ornaments and create a very comfortable and functional piece of furniture and a lightweight piece of furniture, and kind of become simpler. And as Peter also explained already, 6 bent wood pieces and a few screws made a very successful number 14. I mean, they sold 40 million of those chairs, probably 45 million. It became a commodity somehow. But another interesting story to this chair was that the price of the chair was based on the kilogram price of meat. So whatever the kilogram price of meat was at that time, if the meat was cheaper, the chair became cheaper. If the meat went up, the chair went up. So it kind of had a tracker in a way to the real economy of what people could buy in terms of food. I was fortunate enough to visit one of those factories in Croatia. This was called Mundus. Mundus was part of Tone's big empires. At one point, they had about 12 different factories throughout Eastern Europe, producing bentwood furniture. One of the reasons also they settled in Eastern Europe was obviously the vicinity to Vienna, but also in the Czech Republic, the vicinity to wood, especially beech, because usually the chair is made out of beech wood, and a large source of water and energy. So yeah, I was lucky enough to be able to go to one of those factories as part of the project with Terence Conrad, who asked me if I would design a chair using a particular technique in one of those factories. So yeah, as you can see, it's really a hand-on process. I mean, they made 40 million of those chairs, but everyone was handmade. And still nowadays, they are handmade. The chair we saw earlier on from IKEA that looked like one of those Tone chairs was actually a metal version. It's actually a chair that was replicated in metal to make it easier and cheaper to produce. So yeah, here you can see. So basically, I was asked to go to this factory to reinterpret the use of this skill, of this bentwood manufacturing. And I had a great lot of fun to pick up all the different pieces and to make some, as you call, ready-mades or assembly work. And I think what I realized was as well that the company that I went to visit didn't really evolve. I mean, they were still very much doing what Michael Tone would have done, or Michael Tone's son would have done maybe 80 or 100 years ago. So they just keep on producing the same piece of furniture, the same piece, and there was very little innovation. So we can also see that there was an amazing process that was invented that obviously created an amazing chair or amazing family of chairs, but there was not much innovation, not much kind of moving on from there. So my idea was always to go back and use what they had, because they didn't really invest in new machines, and use their skills. So this was something I made, and made many other kind of experiments. It was a bit like being in a chocolate factory, because basically I was there for a whole week, and I could use any piece out of their kind of other parts. And it was interesting to see as well that the people working there were really astonished to suddenly see someone who questioned, in a way, their everyday job, because I would try to make them do things differently. And initially they were kind of a bit apprehensive about it, but then I think after a few days they realized actually they could work with me, and they could try to create something that was potentially a new product. And yeah. But like with all good stories, eventually went back, and the company had closed. So all good intentions. And it was a very sad moment, I have to say, because I've been to the factory maybe 5, 6 times, and the last time when it was like this, it really broke my heart. And I had, for a moment, I also thought to maybe potentially buy the factory, because it was for sale. But unfortunately, a lot of the machines were actually already sold for scraps. And so it was a very kind of difficult moment. And but it also taught me something, that if you don't innovate in design, if you don't have new ideas, eventually someone would do them differently, cheaper. Yeah. So this is not to say that Tone closed down. This is just basically the daughter company of Done that made the same work, and when it came in the hands of the Yugoslavian government, it became a government-run company, and obviously didn't innovate. So that's what happened. Nevertheless, I kept on making more work. I bought loads of bentwood pieces with me, and I kept making new work. And I will talk a little bit later about ready-made work, or work made from existing furniture. But somehow it inspired me to think in new ways, and to combine the existing, the old, with new ideas. And for me, it's always been an interesting way of working, in terms of working with in 3D, working with the real pieces, rather than maybe sketching or kind of trying to create ideas on paper. I always really worked in the physical element with furniture. And interesting enough, from this idea of working with ready-made pieces, a product came out of it a bit later, because one of my ideas was I wanted to create a stacking bentwood chair that hasn't really been designed before, because none of the Tone pieces are stackable. So one idea was to make a coffee house chair, a bit like Michael Tone's, but one that was stackable, with the least amount of bentwood pieces. So in that case, it's basically 2 pieces, because the front legs are the same piece, and the seat. So this was initially done by myself. I actually invested in the chair. I found a producer in Italy that also very skilled, and I also went with those producers to Croatia to visit the factory a few times when it was to be sold. But basically, I launched the chair, and I wanted to sell it myself. And eventually, Patrizia Moroso from the Moroso company came to the studio, and she saw the chair, and she offered me to put them in her production. And initially, I was a little bit apprehensive about it, and I thought, well, I really wanted to do it. I really wanted to kind of design this chair and sell it as well myself. But then I realized that if we went a little bit further with the chair, and maybe introduced a different material as well. So the initial chair is in wood. Then we made a second version in aluminum for outdoors, and also a mix of aluminium and wood. So this one you see here, it's got an aluminium, tubular aluminium backrest and the seat and the legs in wood. So it was interesting to see, coming from wood, trying to make an outdoor product in aluminium, and then kind of making also a hybrid between the two. There's a table also in the family using the same backrest as a table leg. So yeah, so that was an interesting experience. And similar with this chair that you've seen earlier on that I made with Mundus, it became the post-Mundus chair. That actually was, I got interest from the Gebrüder Tone company. So basically, the Tone family at one point split between the Austrian and the German branch in the 70s. So the brand Tone is still a German company who specializes more in the metal and Bauhaus furniture, even though they do some traditional wooden furniture as well. And the Gebrüder Tone, the brothers Tone, is a Vienna, specialized in only the wooden furniture. So they have the same name, a bit confusing for the market. I think they have one or two products actually the same, but they are two different kind of companies nowadays. So this company has been bought by an Italian company, still has the same name. And so they approached me because they wanted to put this piece of furniture in their catalog. So I thought it was quite an interesting way around. So I go from a daughter company of Tone to Croatia. From Croatia, kind of, it goes back to the Gebrüder Tone, and it becomes a product. And while working with this company, we started developing new products. So this is a stool that I developed with them. Again, I tried to use as minimal pieces of bent wood. So this has got basically just one piece. Apart from the high stool, it's got a bent footrest as well, and the seat, of course. But yeah, so very simple kind of way of using the bent wood process. And while I was in the factory working on those stools, again, they had loads of pieces of existing bent wood pieces. So I started playing with them, and I kind of came up with this idea of a stool using exactly the same elements that it has already, but trying to use it a bit more creative. And there's a black and white, and then there's also a small stool. And so the ring also is used at the bottom as a footrest, and the back is like a little backrest. So a different way of the same somehow. I guess this is a project that many of you maybe have seen, heard. It's actually called 100 Days in 100 Days. But I kind of like the idea there is more chairs than there's ways, but I came to, this actually started in 2005 as a project, and it didn't really have any commissioner or anyone asking me to this project. It was a self-initiated project that I wanted to explore the idea of what the chair could be. Also because at that point I've been asked by more chair manufacturers to design chairs. And even though I was a furniture maker, I hadn't really made many chairs before that. So for me it was a research project to understand what a chair could be, what a chair is. And I gave myself 100 days to explore that. And initially it started with collecting broken or discarded chairs from the streets or from friends. And it was very much a way of accumulating as many chairs as I could. And then through this process of one a day, kind of create these hybrids. But these hybrids were for me somehow also characters. So I realized that we talked earlier on about mass production. We talked about, obviously 40 million Tone chairs being produced. But for me, the interest here was different. I wasn't trying to make a product. I was trying to inspire myself. I was trying to maybe find the poetics. That's something that someone in the audience earlier on questioned in a way, with the perfect, simple design that's reduced. Chairs are very personal. They're somehow the negative of our body. If you imagine that, they're made for us, but they're also made to be themselves and be their own characters. And I guess everyone in the audience is a character. Everyone is different. So I really very much saw these chairs as individuals, and I wanted to treat them as individuals. And at the same time, as I was basically taking apart existing chairs and finding new ways of assembling them, finding new ways of combining materials and styles and designers, I learned a lot about how other people have been designing furniture. So somehow by disassembling them, I could tell that the chair was well designed. A chair, the details, the screws, the particular hidden elements, gave me a lot of insight in other people's design. And I also found loads of IKEA chairs, to be honest, but I got really bored of them eventually because they were quite simple and quite badly made. And I have to say, actually, the chairs that really excited me were the more charismatic, the more, I would say, where designers really express themselves. So as you can see, some of those chairs are beautiful, some are ugly, some are special, some are intricate, some are very masculine, some are feminine, some are very fragile, some are quite sculptural. So for me, it was a way to let my creativity kind of run wild. And the process would basically start in the morning. I would go to this big warehouse that I had and look at all the chairs that I found and take some bits together and then go to my workshop and start working really in three-dimensional. So there was hardly any sketching done. Maybe a detail, how I could solve a detail, but it was really hands-on, three-dimensional sketching. And that really gave me also a sense of form and of shape and of proportions. And there's lots of references to design. I mean, so you can see the monoblock chair, the Anna Jacobsen chair, the Tonei chairs, the designer chairs. In some cases, I also had a great satisfaction to cut into those chairs. I remember cutting into that Jasper Morrison air chair on the bottom left. It was a great satisfaction somehow to cut something, and once you cut the legs off of someone's chair, we have to start inventing something new to make it a chair again. So there's also kind of a very immediate need. And so this project was presented in London in a big house, and I didn't really think much about it. I really did it for myself, and I didn't have any expectations. But somehow it got quite a lot of publicity, and it became somehow a new way of looking at chairs. And what's interesting that over the maybe last, this is already 10 years old, this project, but the last 10 years, I mean, I look sometimes at other designers' work, I can sense a little bit that might have been influenced a little bit, and I think that's something that I'm also interested in, that as a designer you do work that might not become an industrial product, but it influences other people's thinking, and it influences the way that they maybe look at things. And also it's become a quite favorite project for schools, for undergraduates or for primary schools, to do this kind of project within a school. So I get asked a lot to come to schools and talk about the project, because I think it gives people of maybe who don't know so much about design a very immediate kind of access to play with furniture, play with chairs, and play with creating something new. So followed by this project, I got a lot of also requests from people, from companies, who said, well, why don't you cut up my piece of furniture? I have loads of broken furniture, I have loads of furniture in my storage, why don't you use them, why didn't you cut them up? And until a certain point, I actually did that. So, for example, I went to this auction house in Chicago. It's quite a well-known auction house. And they told me that they have a lot of original pieces in their warehouse that have been damaged through before it's been consigned or afterwards during the, and they wanted me to do a project there where I basically created all the furniture for the auction room. So I went there for 1 week with my tools, and again, it is kind of performative, almost performative projects where I again cut up originals, Sotzas, Jacobsen, Frank Lloyd Wright, and so on. And at some point, I got asked by a gallery in New York, Salon 94, to rework some Carlo Molino original pieces. So again, it was a way for me to reinterpret a master, and it wasn't initially. It was a bit difficult because in Italy people are very protective about their masters. So people go, how dare you destroying these original pieces? You know, these pieces are also, they're quite, they reach quite high prices in auction houses. But the reasoning behind actually that I managed to get hold of this furniture was that the Casa Molino, who's actually the foundation looking after the archive, had those chairs, but they were, during the process of its use, they had been fixed by someone. So they weren't original anymore. So they had slightly altered, but not very much. Just maybe the bottom was rewelded, or they had reupholstered it. So it couldn't be considered anymore an original. And they were afraid if they sell them, someone will then again come back and sell them again as original. They come back on the market. So they rather have someone destroy them in a way and make something new out of it, than actually just sell them to the market for a cheaper price. So I did a whole thing of 20 pieces with them, and again, I learned a lot about how Carlo Molino was designing, and yeah. So again, over the years, I've been appropriating and working a lot more classical design pieces. So this is Italian classic as well, Piretti. Folding chair, I think one of the most interesting folding chairs designed. Very simple. It folds very flat and quite comfortable. But it's usually made with transparent plastic, and I thought it'd be nice to reintroduce a different material. So I basically just remade them in wood and colorful. So I feel like sometimes in design, you know, you can reinvent the wheel. You can try really hard to come up with this amazing new design, but also sometimes you can also revisit people's work. And I think for me that's always been very interesting to maybe not completely discard what the past has done and kind of learn from this, but also create something new out of it with a different, yeah. So a similar project. This is called it's a G-plan chair. It used to be one of the biggest British furniture manufacturers. It was outside London. And so I made this for an exhibition where I carved in the back of the chair. The ornaments of this house are the friends that frequent it. So basically, it's the people who make the ornament of the house. And again, I used color. I used kind of a new way of kind of interpreting something that obviously was there and was well designed. But then again, I also come up with my own designs. It's not all based on other people's ingenuity and creativity. So in this case, I was asked to design chairs for the oldest restaurant in Italy. Now, the oldest restaurant in Italy is a bit difficult to define because Italy is a fairly new country. It's only about 160 years old. People think Italy is 1,000 years old, but Italy as a country, as a nationhood, is only 160 years old. It was actually founded in Turin, and in Turin was the first parliament. And opposite the parliament was a restaurant called Del Cambio, and that's the restaurant I designed these chairs for. It still has a traditional dining room, but in the back there is a new dining room that was created by the new owner, and he wanted me to create the chairs and also the tables. And yeah, so this is the same version in a different upholstery. Again, I wanted to create a very, very comfortable, simple-looking, but still a little bit historic-looking chair. So yeah, so I got asked to do a lot of chairs for exhibitions, for projects. This was a project that was in homage to a great Italian designer who is still alive. It's called Enzo Mari. He did a project in the 1970s called autoprogettazione, so auto projection. So it's like a project that is kind of homemade, self-made, DIY you could call it. And he basically created drawings how to make chairs out of simple bits of timber. And he created instructions, and the idea was that people had to make them by themselves and only use hammered nails. So this was my kind of interpretation of his project, and of course it comes with a drawing. But that's more or less what he would have done in the project. It was a very simple drawing with measurements and quantities and so on. But then also I got asked to design chairs for shops. In this case, it was Nike Lab shop in Milan, where I created this chair that is kind of almost has a hole in the chair. And I realized I've always been interested by corners, and I did my thesis on corners when I graduated from the Royal College of Art. And I realized actually we don't actually need to sit. We don't need to fill the whole chair with our bottom. It's enough if we sit on two sides. So it creates kind of an empty space behind it, but it also means we only touch the parts that we really need for the chair, and it creates an interesting viewpoint from behind. So this was then used in the shop. And sometimes I've been lucky enough to work with interesting producers, in this case Magis. So this was a chair an outdoor chair. Magis approached me because of course they've seen 100 chairs, they've seen other chairs that I've done, and they wanted me to use a specific technique. And it was basically a metal rod, that they had a machine that could basically three-dimensionally bend this metal rod. It's basically a robot. They can spit out kind of a round metal rod in any shape you want. So it's quite an amazing kind of process. And they had previously done some products, but they weren't so successful. So it was 3 designers who got asked to work with this specific process. So then I came up with this idea of a very fine, simple kind of framework. But because the legs were so fragile in a way with this simple rod, it needed some reinforcement. So I came up with this idea of this kind of little reinforcement. And it's almost called, vigna in Italian means a vine plant. So in this case, it looked a bit like a vine plant that kind of grows up holds itself on the leaves of other vines. Also stackable, and with it came also a table that again was made out of one identical piece. So they all the same. The 3 pieces are the same. So when you put them together, it becomes the table. Sorry, backwards. Yeah. And also the side tables. But also because I've been interested in the cultural aspects of what chairs do. I've been asked to do an exhibition in the National Trust House in Scotland. And basically my proposal was that all the chairs in this National Trust House had to come out, and I would put my chairs into it. So for 1 month, I exchanged the chairs, and I called it the middle chair. And again, I was kind of trying to work with found pieces, reappropriating pieces, So yeah. And this is probably one of the most mass-manufactured chairs as well. I guess this is the tonneau chairs of the 21st century, a monoblock chair. Rather comfortable, but not very aesthetically, maybe not so, I don't know, pleasing. A little bit, always looks a bit cheap always, but so yeah, so I was kind of trying to look at traditional chairs and play with them. So also because the exhibition was in his National Trust House, I was trying to find somehow connections to what else was in the house, the other furniture. So yeah, I'm going to go a bit faster because so I said that obviously a lot of my practice is also not just designing furniture, but I also make the furniture. I have 3 workshops that I work with, or 2 of them in the UK, 1 of them in Italy. So it's very much part of my practice as well to not just design, but actually execute the pieces, have control of the manufacturing, create new ways of doing things, and explore the different fields. This was a commission, so I get commissions quite a bit by people to design chairs for their home. So this was a private commission. We have left and right chairs. Again, very simple frame. Sorry, same images. And then, for example, this was a commission for an alpine chair for a quite beautiful place. This was is a ski hut in the Italian Alps, and they needed something that kind of matched their kind of environment. So they couldn't really find a chair that would fit in this environment, in the context. So it was interesting to first of all go and visit the place, and even though I only made 50 chairs for that particular hut, it became somehow a product afterwards. So sometimes I make chairs for let's say, limited edition, but then this becomes then a product that is sold somewhere else. So different finish, different slightly modifications. And this is a project that I've done last year, where again I wanted to create furniture that I could make in my workshop myself, with my people, but I could make in a small batch production. But so it was important that it was the simplest kind of joint, but also I didn't want to make it too simple, so I created a kind of an interesting way of joining a round and a square piece together. So the collection has got a chair, it's got an armchair, it's got a day bed, and so on. So from this we come to something called the Arnold Circus stool. The Arnold Circus is a roundabout. A circus in English is a roundabout or a round kind of square, like a piazza. And this was one of the first social housings in London. It's called the Boundary Estate. It's in East London. And throughout the 80s and 90s, they had quite a few social issues, gangs, drugs. I guess now it's gentrified, but at that time, nobody really wanted to hang out anymore in this nice bandstand because it was people dealing in drugs. So people who lived around this square, they call themselves the Friends of the Arnold Circus, tried to regenerate this place and tried to reclaim it from the gangs. And the only way I think that they thought that they can reclaim a space is actually to use it themselves. So they started organizing events, concerts, picnics, and so on. So I helped them initially to kind of create these events, and to use those events needed furniture. So they wanted to go out and buy some IKEA furniture because it was cheap, and that's what they could afford. So I told them, if they give me the same money that they're going to give IKEA, I'm going to design them a stool, and I'm going to find a manufacturer, and I'm going to add the same amount of money from my pocket, and we're going to make a tool. So basically, what I designed was a stackable stool that could be used for their functions in a simple rotation molding process. So rotation molding is a very, very low-tech kind of process where you have a negative mold, you put some plastic pellets in there, and you basically rotate it in an oven. And basically, the plastic then melts on the outside of this, inside this mold, and it creates a hollow shape that you then cut open, and you have a stool or another object. And I found an interesting producer in Somerset that used to make agricultural kind of products. And initially, I didn't really think much about it. I thought, well, it's an interesting project for the friends in the circus, but eventually I got interest from other people to sell the stools, and it's become actually a good product for my studio because we manufacture it ourselves, we sell it ourselves, and we do it in many different colors. And so it kind of shows that sometimes design doesn't have to come necessarily from the need to sell something and go to your producer. It can also come from a social interaction, on a cultural interaction where you first design something for the community or design something for a city, for example, or for a place. We tried different shapes as well, wasn't so successful, and started adding also different elements to the stool so it become kind of a chair or a table or a little poof. But yeah, I think finally to conclude, I think there's no perfect human being, and therefore there's also no perfect chair to go with it. And I think I would embrace that obviously there are interesting designed objects out there that have been sold and manufactured for many, many years, but I also think that there is a need for individual projects and projects that have a poetic quality. So thank you very much.